Welcome everyone. Bienvenue. We have people attending this session from across the country. My name is Taylor Polinchuk. I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I work with Solus Energy Consulting Incorporated. We've been in the renewable energy, energy storage, EV, and hydrogen space. We've been around since 2009. Our work on the EV market has been primarily on the vehicles that are available in the Canadian market. So we want to start off our presentation with a land acknowledgement. Our Canada office is based in Calgary, which is part of the Treaty 7 territory. And Solus Energy acknowledges that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai. We also acknowledge the Tsuut'ina and the Stoney Nakoda First Nations and the Métis Nation, Districts 5 and 6, and all people who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. As I mentioned previously, my name is Taylor Polinchuk, and I will be presenting today with my co-host, Jonah Isaiu and Runaya McWhorter. So Solus Energy Consulting is owned by two women, Paula McGarrigle and Evelyn Carpenter. Solus Energy Consulting is based in Canada and the US. The US office is in Fort Collins, Colorado. We've been in the renewable energy space for almost 24 years. Our projects are over 115 gigawatts, primarily wind and solar and energy storage as well. Over the past 5 years, we've entered into the EV industry. We typically work for large clients who find out about our services from others. We provide advisory services and support to our clients. In relation to our EV expertise, Solus Energy has been a strong supporter in helping clients with their transportation decarbonization projects. We've been involved in various initiatives, guiding clients through the complexities of the electric vehicle projects. Our work spans understanding the EV value chain, sizing up the market, and identifying specific business opportunities. We've gone a step further by creating detailed models for EV deployment, focusing on specific regions. In addition to our modeling work, we've tackled strategies for EV infrastructure. This involves evaluating suitable locations to make the most of existing infrastructure for EV charging facilities. We've also delved into fleet electrification roadmaps and green fleet policies, exploring opportunities and providing practical insights. Our expertise extends beyond the technical aspects. We've delved into the business side, understanding regulations, engaging with suppliers, and helping clients navigate rules like the clean fuel regulations. We shed light on federal and provincial EV targets, drawing on our 25 years of experience in the electricity sector. But our commitment goes even further. We're not just about EVs. We're also diving into the hydrogen sector, especially fuel cell electric vehicles. Our work covers a broad spectrum, including technical, economic, commercial, operational, and political aspects of the mobility sector. This includes energy storage, integrating electric vehicles into the grid, understanding charging infrastructure, pricing dynamics, and more. At Solus Energy, we aim to be more than just a service provider. We want to be your strategic partner in navigating the intricate landscape of energy transition. We have recently added Zaudi Culbreath to our team as a ZEV expert. Zaudi comes with 7 years of experience working with Tesla for Canada charging infrastructure. We are excited to have him join our team. For today's webinar, we'll start by providing an update on ZEV market trends. And that will be followed by a myths and facts section. This section focuses on common concerns around EV fleet adoption. We have also included a few polls in this section. For simplicity's sake, all of the polls will be true or false, and we ask that everyone who is willing to participate by reacting with either a thumbs up for true or a laughing emoji for false. At the end, I will conclude and open up the webinar for questions. So we want to start off with some pretty big EV news. So in the wake of the US pushing for domestic manufacturing, Tesla has shifted a lot of their US-based manufacturing to China for their Canadian sales. And currently, 38% of China's EV exports go to the EU. And a large electric vehicle company in China called BYD is setting up EU factories. Now, this is all important and interesting because the US has recently imposed an import tariff on Chinese made EVs, and this is up to 100% now. And these tariffs are focused on increasing domestic production within the US. And the EU has also imposed tariffs up to 38% on Chinese made EVs. And currently, Chinese made EVs account for about 4% of EV market share in Europe. Canada is now looking at potentially adopting some of this. The current tariff on Chinese made vehicles in Canada is 6%. But yesterday, Canada announced a 30-day consultation period to examine EV trade practices and potential tariffs. And for all three of these regions, the reason they're considering these tariffs is they're either domestic vehicle production, as well as citing that there's unfair subsidies from the Chinese government. So to put this all in context, we made a little pie chart here just showing the top 4 EV production from 2018 to 2023. And from this pie chart, you can see that China has produced a vast majority of the EVs in the world over the last 5 years. So this will be a huge impact on EVs across the world. So in other news, there's also been an uptick in EV charging cables theft. So part of this is due to the price of copper, as it has reached a record high of $5.20 a pound. And these thefts are occurring across the country. They're not centralized to a specific state. And a lot of this is because of the low security in the regions where we have a lot of these charges. They're typically in remote corners of the parking lot where there aren't very many cameras and they're not as well trafficked. And these thefts are increasing. So Electrify America reported in 2022 only about 2 thefts, whereas this year they've already reported 129 thefts from January to May this year. And this is important to note because the price that someone could get for a stolen EV charging cable is only about $15 to $20 per cable. But by contrast, it can cost about $1,000 to replace this cable. So this can prevent a lot of potential buyers for EVs from seriously considering this option, as there's the fear of being able to charge their vehicle. And on the hydrogen fuel cell side, there are a lot more manufacturers developing hydrogen fuel cell EVs. And this includes Volkswagen, Honda, Hyundai, BMW, Stellantis, and Toyota, with 2 of these being Stellantis and Honda are now producing hydrogen fuel cells within North America. As Stellantis has announced they're going to produce the Ram 5500 in Mexico for the North American market, and Honda is now producing the 2025 CR-V hydrogen fuel cell in Ohio. Last year, hydrogen fuel cell EV sales were actually up by 10%. But that being said, all of these sales were within California. And then the Edmonton International Airport has recently committed to phasing 100 fuel cell electric vehicle Toyota Mirais into their fleet over the course of 1 year. So there's a lot of growth and a lot of excitement about hydrogen fuel cell vehicles as well. So with that, we're going to transition into sales, and I'll turn it over to Jonah.
We are going to start off our sales section with historical and recent data for EVs. And we'll begin this with a poll question. So the question is, true or false, EV sales in Canada have begun to decline after years of growth? Some people saying false, and they are correct. So let's explore why in the next slide. On this slide, we have 2 bar graphs of new vehicle registrations from 2019 to Q1 2024. The top graph represents new ICE registrations, and the bottom graph represents new ZEV registrations. ICE means internal combustion engine, and ZEV means zero-emission vehicle. The scale of the ZEV graph is smaller by a factor of 6 for legibility. ZEV includes battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, but not hybrid electric vehicles, based off of the Government of Canada ZEV definition. But essentially, hybrid vehicles use too much gas to be considered as zero emissions. In the top graph, you can see that there is a year-over-year decrease of registrations for ICE vehicles, as opposed to a year-over-year increase in the bottom graph for ZEV registrations. So, EV sales are in fact increasing year over year, and we will explore this more in the next slide. This table contains a lot of information, and I'll only be going over certain bold key figures, but please feel free to screenshot if you'd like to examine the deals more closely later. And what's represented here is ICE versus ZEV sales registrations for 2022 and 2023, broken down into sections from left to right as ZEVs, HEVs, ICE vehicles, and yearly totals. These columns are further broken up into rows of total new additions year of, absolute growth from the previous year, percentage growth from the previous year, and the percent of total registration additions for each vehicle type. Both HEVs and ZEVs are growing at a much higher rate than ICEs, seen as a 49.4% ZEV increase and 67.2% HEV increase in 2023, as opposed to ICEs in 2023 having 6.6% growth, with the total 2023 year growth was 13.4%, meaning the remaining 6.8% of additions were hybrids and ZEVs. So ICEs grew at a lesser rate than the more eco-friendly options, losing market share in 2023, and the percent of total additions grow at the bottom. They grew by 5.1% less than 2022. Leading from this, in 2023, ZEVs made up 10.8% of additions, and HEVs made up 7.9%, both of which are up roughly 2% from 2022. Even when vehicle registrations went negative in 2022, comparing the negative 11.7% ICE loss to the negative 8.2% total registration loss means that ZEVs and HEVs made up a larger number of additions than ICE that year. So we can clearly see that regardless of overall vehicle registration growth numbers in a given year, eco-friendly additions are consistently increasing and making up larger proportions of Canada's automotive market. This graph shows ZEVs as a percentage of new vehicle sales, and Canada has reached 9.9% of new vehicles as zero-emission vehicles in 2023. The trend is definitely up. In the next 3 years, this would require more than tripling of the annual sales of EVs to make the target. The federal sales targets for ZEVs are 20% by 2026, 60% by 2030, and 100% by 2035, as shown by the red maple leaves. Solis's energy EV sales forecast indicates that Canada is on track to meet the federal sales targets for electric vehicles. This graph shows the percentage of new ZEV sales from 2010 to 2040, the dotted line showing where we are at now. Note the steep upward trend starting around 2023, indicating rapid adoption. The data is segmented by regions: Canada total, British Columbia, Quebec, Ontario, and other provinces. British Columbia and Quebec are leading in adoption rates, followed by Ontario and other provinces, and the forecast aligns with federal sales targets mentioned in the previous slide, represented once more by the red maple leaves. By 2026, 35% of new vehicle sales are expected to be EVs, with this figure increasing to 75% in 2030 and 93% by 2035. And the government has put some programs into place to aid this adoption, which we will explore in the next slide. Under targets and initiatives, BEVs, FCEVs, and longer-range plug-in hybrid vehicles are eligible for a $5,000 incentive, while shorter-range plug-in hybrids receive a $2,500 incentive under the iZEV program. The federal budget in 2019 proposed a 100% tax write-off for ZEVs to support business adoption, with the vehicle base cost limited to $55,000 or under. This 100% business tax write-off continued through 2023, and then reduces to 75% for years ending 24 and 25, and 55% for years ending 26 and 27. Given the average age of a vehicle is 15 years, putting in place a 100% ZEV sales target by 2035 will help end the use of ICE vehicles by 2050. The Zero Emission Vehicles Program, or iZEV, and the Zero-Emission Vehicle Infrastructure Program are key initiatives supporting the adoption of ZEVs and the development of necessary infrastructure. And $680 million has been allocated for incentives for charging and refueling infrastructure under the ZEVIP program. This initiative is ending in 2027, with the objective being to address lack of charging and refueling stations in Canada by increasing the availability of localized charging and hydrogen refueling opportunities in Canada. This ends our sales section, and I will now pass it on to Maya.
Okay, it's time to talk about safety myths with ZEVs. To kick it off, we have another poll question. True or false? ZEVs are more likely to catch fire than ICE vehicles. So the answer is false. Let's explore why in the next slide. So this is safety myth number 1 that we're going to dive into. EV batteries catch on fire. On the left here, I have a graph of fires per 100,000 vehicles sold from data collected from the 2023 National Transportation Safety Board in the US. The rightmost bar represents ICE fires and the leftmost represents EV fires. You can see that ICE fires have around 1,500 fires per 100K vehicles sold, and EV fires have less than 100 fires. Keep in mind that this is on the same scale. In Sweden, EVs and hybrids make up over 12% of all the vehicles on the road. Yet, these vehicles only account for 1.9% of all passenger vehicle fires each year on average. So, why is it that every single time an EV fire occurs, you hear about it in the news, but you never hear about ICE vehicle fires? Paul A. Cole, a professor in the School of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at Georgia Tech, says that the media doesn't treat EVs and ICEs with equal footing because gasoline is just not sensational anymore. Our second fact that we're going to dive into is EV fires require specialized approaches. EV fires are extinguished with standard firefighting procedures. There's no specialized technology or equipment needed. However, EV fires can require a specialized approach. Often, they take a lot more water. Automakers who have supplied guidelines to the NFPA generally suggest over 10,000 liters of water or more to put out an EV fire. This is compared to ICE fires, which can take only between 2,000 to 4,000 liters. There's also a much higher chance of the EVs being reignited after the fire is extinguished. Thermal runaway is a chemical chain reaction, thus damaged batteries remain at the risk of reigniting for far longer than ICE vehicles. Our last point is that, if safe, it's best to allow EV fires to burn out. If there is minimal risk of a fire spreading, the city of Phoenix, Arizona, recommends to simply allow the vehicle to burn. Our safety myth number 2 is the EV battery will leak dangerous fluid if damaged. On this slide, we have a visualization of all of the dangerous fluids that EV and ICE vehicles contain. It is important to note that some fluids would leak from an EV are common to ICE vehicles, such as brake and windshield washer fluid, but these were excluded for clarity. You can see that EVs contain the EV battery electrolytes, while ICE vehicles typically contain an additional 72 to 100 liters of dangerous fluids. EV batteries don't contain this fluid because they're typically dry cell batteries. This means that a few drops of fluid will be produced if the cell is crushed, which is much less than the amount of oil, antifreeze, and gasoline that would leak if an ICE vehicle was damaged similarly. Safety myth number 3 is that electric vehicles are more dangerous to operate and charge than ICE vehicles. We've identified 3 main points here. Our first one is that all vehicles sold must meet the same safety standards. Whether you're EV vehicles or ICE vehicles, these safety standards apply to everything. Additionally, EV batteries have testing standards that they must meet as well. EVs also typically have extra safety precautions and features like collision detectors, which disconnect the battery's fuses if it anticipates damage to the battery from a collision. Our last point is from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, who studied 9 vehicle models from 2011 to 2019. They found that injury claims relating to the drivers and passengers of electric vehicles were more than 40% lower than for identical conventional models. So as you can see, overall, ICE and EV vehicles are held to the same standards, and EVs are no more dangerous to operate and charge than ICEs. Our safety fact number 2 is that electric vehicles pose a higher risk to pedestrians. So to fully understand this, I'm going to take you quickly through the timeline of mitigating electric vehicle risk to pedestrians. So, in the early 2000s, advocacy groups, particularly those representing blind and visually impaired individuals, started raising concerns about the potential dangers of quiet vehicles. Organizations began advocating for solutions to address this issue. In 2009, studies were conducted to see if the concerns were true. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration study confirmed that EVs were more likely to be involved in pedestrian accidents. In particular, they found that they were twice as likely to be involved in pedestrian accidents at low speed compared to ICE vehicles. There are a bunch more studies done, but all of them recommended the implementation of an acoustic vehicle alerting system to mitigate this risk. An acoustic vehicle alerting system, or AVAS, is technology installed in a car that emits a fake engine noise, often a hum, at low speeds, because these EVs don't emit the same noise as an engine would. In Canada, in 2018, regulations were first proposed requiring AVAS for electric and hybrid vehicles. The final regulation was published in 2019, and it stated that by the end of that year, all new models of EVs introduced to the market were required to be equipped with AVAS. And by 2023, all new models sold in Canada must be equipped with this technology. So, a study published last month, May 21st, by the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health showed that EVs are 3 times more likely to cause harm to pedestrians than ICE vehicles when measuring mile for mile in urban environments. This was based off of data, however, of pedestrians being hit by cars during 2013 to 2017. This was picked up by major news sources all across Canada, and the issue of EV safety pedestrians was spread around all over again. However, if we compare this to our timeline, we can see that this data was taken from before acoustic vehicle alerting systems were made mandatory for all electric vehicles and even implemented. So, since all of the studies that were done recommended AVAS as a mitigation measure, the risk will have surely gone down. The last little section we've identified is relating to myths surrounding EVs and water. Our first myth is that you can get electrocuted if you touch an EV in a crash or it is submerged. And the next one is EVs are dangerous to drive in the rain or put through a car wash. So, electric shock is a genuine concern for lithium ion batteries. Water can cause a short circuit in the battery, leading to overheating and a potential explosion. Water can cause corrosion that damages the battery and renders it useless, or water can even penetrate the battery casing, leading to the leakage of some chemicals. However, all cars have an electrical system, which means insulating and protecting batteries from the road is not a new practice at all. Specific standards and codes relating to electric vehicles deal with how they are protected and sealed. Many electric vehicles have sensors that can shut off the battery in case of a crash or rollover. It is interesting to note, however, that electric scooters do not have these same safety standards. Electric scooters are often equipped with lithium ion batteries, the same type in cars. They have different levels of waterproofing ability that are varying, and so the risks of short circuits, battery leakage, and corrosion are much greater. I'm now going to pass it back to Jonah, who's going to talk about reliability myths.
True or false? EVs have approximately half the lifetime maintenance costs of comparable gas-powered cars. The answer is true. So, a myth you might have heard is that EVs have expensive maintenance costs and poor reliability. The reality is actually opposite. The first reason relating to the poll, in that EVs have half the lifetime maintenance costs of comparable gas-powered cars, with average costs around $4,600 for EVs versus $9,200 for ICE vehicles. In addition, EVs do not require oil changes, spark plug replacements, timing belt changes, or other common and recurring costs for ICE vehicles. Finally, the simplicity of EV drivetrains, which have more than 10 times less the number of moving parts, mean there are fewer opportunities for mechanical failure. Another myth you may have heard is that EV batteries have poor longevity, and while this slide explores how they have less longevity than ICE vehicles, the batteries may have more longevity than you might think. EV batteries typically last between 8 to 15 years, which translates to 160,000 to 320,000 kilometers, and they can last up to 20 years in moderate climates, with 8 years being a low figure for extremely harsh usage conditions. On average, EV battery capacity degrades by 2.3% of maximum capacity per year, and Tesla claims to be close to developing a battery that would last for approximately 1.5 million kilometers. Technology is improving, and newer batteries have higher energy density, with new batteries self-charging at rates of only 1 to 2%, which is lower than previous batteries. Batteries have low replacement rates, and only 1.5% of EVs have had their batteries replaced outside of manufacturer recalls. In contrast, ICEs typically need major engine repairs or even replacements at 240,000 to 320,000 kilometers, which translates to approximately 11 to 15 battery years. The US government has recently implemented mandates for EV manufacturers to warranty batteries for at least 8 years or 160,000 kilometers, whichever comes first. And many manufacturers offer warranties for 10 years or 240,000 kilometers. This ends the reliability section, and I'll pass it back to Naya.
Okay, this is our very last section. We're going to talk about versatility myths. So this is our very last poll as well. True or false? EVs have greater range and torque than ICE vehicles when towing. The answer is false. So EVs have very impressive torque figures, but their range is actually significantly less than ICE vehicles, even when not towing. So let's dive into that a little bit. Our versatility myth we identified, number one, is that EVs cannot tow. So there are a bunch of factors that go into if a vehicle is good for towing or not. Two ones that are often considered are torque and range of a vehicle. Torque is often considered a lot better in electric vehicles because it is available immediately. Combustion engines take time to reach their maximum torque figures. As you can see, torque on electric vehicles can be sometimes 10 times as great as torque on an ICE vehicle. However, the range of EVs is smaller than the range of typical ICE vehicles. Another thing to note is that when towing, the range in an EV can be affected depending on the load, just like how towing requires more gas. And the extra load can affect the efficiency of the battery and dramatically decrease the range by up to half of its original number. All of this combined makes EVs well suited for short range towing. As you can see below, many EV models are built to tow. One example not pictured here is the Tesla Model X, with a towing capacity of 5,000 pounds, torque of 1,400 pound-feet, and range of 536 kilometers. Below, we have a direct comparison of the EV and ICE version of two models. On the left of each comparison is the electric version. We have the Ford F-150 Lightning and the GMC Hummer 3X. The Ford F-150 Lightning has a towing capacity of 10,000 pounds, and the GMC Hummer X has a towing capacity of 8,500 pounds. The non-electric versions of these cars have towing capacities of 14,000 pounds and 4,500 pounds each. This really shows how EVs are able to compete and keep up with ICE vehicles in this genre of vehicle to fill this niche. So our second myth identified is that EVs are not suitable for driving in the winter. As with any vehicle, there are pros and cons to driving in the winter. For the pros of most EVs, they will have a more consistent engine performance in cold weather, as turning them on is just like turning on a light switch. Regenerative braking, which is often equipped on EVs, is thought of as safer because there's an increased time of braking. Additionally, there's typically a lower center of gravity, which improves grip and increases stability on slippery roads, as well as reducing the risk of a rollover. Overall, there's a lot less maintenance for an EV, just like Jonah just talked about, as we just learned, decreasing the risk of mechanical failure and requiring a lot less routine checkups, which is something very important in the winter. In 2023, however, the NAF tested the range of EVs in winter conditions. The study found that the average range reduction in cold weather was about 18.5%, with some models experiencing reductions as high as 30%. This test included driving in temperatures in the negative degrees, of course. Now for the cons, right? The big one that hangs over everybody's head, as we just saw, is the reduced range. Driving an EV in the winter is so much more energy consuming because there's no waste heat created by an EV battery. In ICE vehicles, all of the waste heat generated by the engine is funneled into the cabin, warming it up. However, to heat an EV cabin, energy must be consumed to create that heat. This greatly reduces the range in the battery as a lot of the energy is funneled into heating instead of into range. Overall, the efficiency of the battery is decreased because of the cold, and there are also reports of slower charging times as well. So there are a lot of cons and a lot of pros. I don't think it this myth is sort of busting and saying that it's not fair to say that EVs are just not suitable for driving in the winter. And this is our last myth we've identified today. There aren't enough chargers for road trips. So, if EV range is such a prevalent issue, what's the deal with this? Here we have a map of all of the charging stations in Alberta. As you can see, there are EV stations all over and very widespread through the province. I personally find it very interesting that the chargers highlight the major thoroughways of the province. As you can see, from Edmonton all the way down to Lethbridge, there are stations lining the highway. So, this is a graph showing the growth of EV charging points throughout the years, again in Alberta. You can see that right now we're up to about 1,500 chargers. This rapid growth of charging infrastructure in Alberta is something to really consider. This graph really shows that even though we have so many chargers currently, this infrastructure will keep expanding to support this growing industry. It's also interesting to note that Alberta also has been one of the provinces most resistant to embracing this technology. Compared to provinces like BC and Quebec, who each have over 5,000 charging ports, Quebec has almost 10,000. This shows that even provinces who have the least infrastructure are able to support charging all across the province and are growing. Now I'm going to turn it back to Taylor to wrap it up.
All right. Thank you, Jonah and Naya. So, just in conclusion, I want to go over a few of the main points that we covered. So, the first one being that ZEV sales in Canada are still rising, even while internal combustion engine sales are remaining stagnant. There are also increasing obstacles to ZEV adoption, unfortunately, including EV tariffs and charging cable thefts. But generally speaking, EVs are safer than their ICE counterparts with some education. And EVs typically have much lower maintenance and repair requirements than their counterparts. And for number 5 there, ZEVs are constantly improving in every aspect and becoming a more compelling fleet option. And EV fleet charging infrastructure has been rapidly growing, decreasing any charging concerns that adopters may have. So, with this in mind, I also want to put another plug in that Solus Energy offers these free informational webinars, such as this one, to update stakeholders on market trends. Additionally, we also provide a subscription based EVI database to help fleet owners recognize what options are out there and how they can transition their fleets, as well as fleet transitioning support and regulatory support. So if you have any questions or anything that Solus Energy might be able to help you with, we'd be glad to answer your questions and to provide that support as needed. Just in closing, I'd like to say thank you so much for attending our webinar. And please, if you have any further questions or anything that we could possibly help and support with, we'd be more than happy to help. Please do not hesitate to reach out. Otherwise, we'll be excited to see you at our next webinar. Stay tuned.